Yesterday, a new annual report was released that exposes the top offenders of Christian persecution worldwide. The Red List, compiled by Global Christian Relief using the Violence Incident Database, highlights the top 5 countries where documented killings, arrests, displacements, attacks, and assaults and abductions against Christians are most severe. And it notes some troubling trends. Joining me to unpack the new report is Isaac Six. He is the Senior Director of Advocacy for Global Christian Relief. Isaac, welcome to Washington Watch. Good to see you, and a Happy New Year.
Good to see you, too. Thank you for having me.
So before we jump into this list, share with what makes this list unique, Isaac.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So a couple of years ago, Global Christian Relief identified a need when it came to reporting on Christian persecution. There are several great annual reports that come out from organizations that we cooperate with on assisting the persecuted, and those reports have their role to play. But we noted that there wasn't any reporting happening of hard, verifiable data using public sources on some of these numbers. So a lot of the reports will look at, they'll take surveys, they'll make estimates about the numbers. But we noted that when we're talking with policymakers and we're talking with leaders, they want numbers that can be verified, that can be sourced easily in public sources, and that are very hard to refute. So that's where we decided to come up with the Red List, and that's built on the Violent Incidents Database, which is research that we've commissioned. So this is over 2 years of very intense research looking at every single possible public source and report on persecution over the last couple of years, and then tabulating those numbers. The second reason we did this is we also, for our own work, wanted to be able to focus and be effective on the ground. We're in these countries doing work with the persecuted church, and so we need to see what we were missing and where we need to help.
So let's go through the categories. Let's start with what is obviously most concerning. That is the killing of Christians. This is where we find Nigeria to be the most dangerous place in the world for Christians.
That's right. Yep. We documented 9,814 killings in a 2-year period. That confirms a lot of other reporting out there that Nigeria is the most dangerous place on earth for Christians, where they face the most intense violence. Our number is a little lower, again, than you're going to see in some other reports, because we're only using numbers that we can source from verifiable quality sources. So, but yes, Nigeria for a long time now has been one of the most dangerous places for Christians to operate. The stories coming out of Nigeria are almost unimaginable. And I think if the American church heard some of these stories on a regular basis, they would be shocked. Just one go ahead.
No. This is something I've been discussing for some time, going back to when I was on, you worked at the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, and so we first connected there. This picture has grown increasingly dark for Christians in Nigeria. There was a ray of light during the previous Trump administration when Secretary Pompeo took our recommendation to list Nigeria as a country of particular concern. The Biden administration immediately removed it from the list when they came in, and it has only gotten worse since then in the last 4 years. What's it going to take to turn things around there in Nigeria?
Yeah, it's going to take a lot. And you're absolutely right. At the very end of the Trump administration, that was the first time Nigeria was ever designated a country of particular concern, despite years of targeted killings. So to see that designation removed, and that designation is important. It signals to these countries that the United States and others are extremely concerned about what's happening. And it can open up these countries to economic sanctions and other measures. So it's going to take a concerted, organized effort at the policy level and also at the ground level to shift the tide in Nigeria. But it's simply been unaddressed. The federal government and the state governments in Nigeria need to be put under a lot more pressure to do something about this. They probably have the resources, but they're just not prioritizing protecting Christians in the middle and northern parts of the country. So, I mean, this is...
Before we move on to one of the next categories, this is one that is for me, very problematic, because these people have very little defense and their government is not helping them. Basically just turning a blind eye as these Muslim radicals are killing Christians, burning their homes, their churches, attacking them. What can you said the church needs to become aware. What can be done to aid in the plight of our brothers and sisters there in Nigeria?
Yeah. Well, if you go to our website, gcrelief.org, you're going to see some of the stories and the projects that we're doing. It's a whole range. But we're going in and bandaging the church. We're finding those who've lost everything. One of the stories I just wrote after we conducted an interview with one of the survivors there, and we haven't published it yet, but as a woman who was taken by Boko Haram, which is one of the primary Islamist groups there committing persecution, and with her children, several of her children, and 4 of her sons were executed in front of her while she was as soon as she was taken captive. And then she spent another year and a half in captivity, finally escaped, and had nothing at all. So through our ministry and one of the pastors we support there who found her, we were able to provide her with a new home to live in, to be reunited with her children. We helped her start a new business and basically start her life again and get back on her feet. So but we are just a drop in the bucket compared to the need there to restore the church. At the same time, though, it's going to take political pressure as well, because a lot of these areas where Boko Haram and these other groups have come in and wiped out Christian communities, other Muslim groups have moved in and taken over their land and property, and they're not planning to give it back anytime soon.
All right, what other countries make that top 5 in terms of the killing of Christians?
Yeah, so there's several other countries on the top 5 list with killing of Christians, although they are leagues away from Nigeria. They're in the hundreds in terms of what we were able to document. And again, I should clarify, there are probably more killings than what we're documenting. These are just carefully verified sources. So number 2 is the Democratic Republic of Congo. Number 3 is Mozambique. Number 4 is Ethiopia. And then sort of surprising, number 5 is Russia.
Yeah, let's talk about Russia. Now, I know that Russia has been a problem for religious freedom because my time on the Commission for Speaking Out, they sanctioned me. I've been sanctioned by both China and Russia. But is this related to what they're doing in Ukraine, where they're the targeting of Christians in Ukraine, in the territories in Ukraine?
Yeah, it's actually a mix with Russia. So in terms of the killings, a lot of the numbers we verified are the result of an Islamist insurgency in the North Caucasus in a region called Dagestan, which borders Azerbaijan and Georgia and the Caspian Sea. And so there we see Russian Orthodox Christians and others being targeted by Islamist violence. At the same time, Russia also makes our list for arrests, and that is taking place primarily in occupied areas of eastern Ukraine, where at the behest of Russian Orthodox leaders, evangelicals, Baptists, Pentecostals are being arrested and detained if they refuse to comply with new rules, if they continue to try and worship freely, if they don't hand over property to the Russian occupying forces, things like that. So there are also some killings we've confirmed in eastern Ukraine of evangelicals by Russian forces or Russian proxy forces.
Do we know what is happening to those Christians who are being arrested and detained there by Russian authorities?
Yes, some of them are being sent away. Some of them are facing long-term sentences. Others are released on various conditions, but they're in hiding. I heard from someone who survived or who has family members who are living essentially in a underground church type situation now, a Baptist family. And there's various outcomes, but it's not good for most of them. And there's really no due process for any of them when it comes to the charges that they're facing.
Isaac, another country that has been on my radar in my time with the Commission, and one that is kind of getting a pass from many in the West just because of their growing economic power, and that is India. India has become a very difficult country for Christians.
That's right. And India tops our list in terms of attacks on Christian property, targeted attacks. A lot of that is from riots that have taken place over the last couple of years in Manipur, India, where tens of thousands of Christians have been displaced and thousands of Christian buildings and churches and homes have been wiped out or destroyed. But yes, India is a good example of why our focus on violence is so important, because the persecutors, this isn't just random violence. Persecutors use violence to drive out Christians and then to take control and capture the culture in some of these countries. So in India, for example, this is a decade of systematic, planned, organized occupation of some Christian areas. And it's now at the point where every every single rung of civil society and government is armed against Christian communities, impoverished Christian communities in some of these places, meaning you have no recourse. There's, the police aren't going to help you. If you manage to get in front of a judge, the judge is biased against you. Every institution has sort of been captured over a decade in some parts of India, and that's leading to mass suppression of the church.
Very similar situation in Nigeria from a standpoint of the government being against you. You have no recourse. And this is, I always like to look at these issues internationally from a domestic standpoint as well. This is why we need to make sure that we have religious freedom in this country, because this is what happens when you don't have it. We just have about 4 minutes left, Isaac. Let's talk a little bit about first off, where can people see the full report? Give us that information.
Yeah, please go to GC Relief. That's gcrelief.org. You're going to find a link to the report on the front page of our website, or you can go to the tab called labeled Research at the top. There's a drop-down box. You can fill in your email address through a link there and get a full copy of the report.
All right, and if you didn't get that, just go to tonyperkins.com and follow the links over. All right, let's talk about the trends that you're seeing here that are troubling.
Yeah, I think one of the big ones, and again, this is why this kind of research is important, because one of the trends we've noticed, and it's just so far outside of the public eye, but the growth of radical Islamist insurgencies in the sub-Saharan Africa, the Sahel, sub-Saharan Africa, and now deep into the southern and southeastern parts of Africa is uprooting things there. I mean, places like Mozambique, which makes our list in several places where there's been mass displacement of Christians. These are places where only 10 years ago, Christians and Muslims generally got along peacefully. There was not as much dissension, and that whole landscape is changing. So a lot of the southern half of that continent, which there is immense mineral wealth, places like the Congo, where 70% of global cobalt production happens, which is for all the batteries that we use for everything. These areas are riven by this conflict. So it's going to have effects across the globe. And that's why we need people in the church in America to become involved, because they can help us stand against this tide.
So let's talk about, just a couple minutes we have left, policy recommendations in terms of what the incoming administration might do to provide greater protection through influence with these foreign governments for Christians around the globe.
Yeah. Well, the number one by far that we have been pushing for quite some time, and I know you have as well, but we need to redesignate Nigeria a country of particular concern. The President-elect Trump can do that on day one when he steps into office, and that'll signal to the Nigerian authorities that it's time to pay attention to this again. And then there's further measures that we can go beyond that. They need to understand that the relationship with the United States is going to deteriorate quickly if these mass killings and attacks continue to happen. So that's first. There's others. With India, we're recommending that the next administration build relationships at the state level with leaders there. They need to make clear to those state level leaders that the relationship with the United States is dependent on upholding certain values like religious freedom. And then we have several other recommendations. The last one I'll note is with Azerbaijan. As you know, Azerbaijan drove out 120,000 Christians in late 2023. They wiped out 1,700 years of Christian presence in an area called Nagorno-Karabakh. And so we've pushed, and others are pushing Azerbaijan to reopen that corridor, give these people the right to return home, even if they're not going to relinquish the territory.
A lot to be done, and it shows the influence the United States can have. We were trending in a positive direction during the last Trump administration, and all that was lost, and we've fallen back during the last 4 years. Isaac, I want to thank you for joining us. Appreciate the work that you do. It's very, very important work.
Thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate it.